Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Gizmo Joe. In front of me is a phone, and this is a Samsung A12. Now, the Samsung A12 is very much a budget device, and basically, I picked it up when I came back to the States because, long story short, Australian phones use different bands or whatever to the US, and so therefore, my Australian phone was having problems connecting to the network. I'd drop out, wouldn't be able to send messages, wouldn't be able to connect to the mobile internet. And so I figured I would just pick up a cheap sort of burner phone while I was in the States. And so one of the cheapest options was the Samsung A12. Now, a lot of carriers in the United States will give you this guy basically for free, provided you enter into, like a prepaid deal or something like that. But I just got mine outright. I'm lucky because I know somebody who works for one of the phone companies in the States, and so therefore he was able to give this to me free of charge. Now, as you can see, it's just a standard sort of bar type phone. Now, I swapped out the launcher, so I'm actually using Microsoft Launcher on this particular device. If you bought it and pulled it out of the box, it would just be running the Samsung One UI, which is fine, but I'm not super into it, so I figured I'd give the Microsoft Launcher a shot. I've never used it before, and actually quite enjoy it. I think it's pretty good. Takes a little bit of getting used to because things are laid out a little bit differently, especially the gestures and things like that. But that's beside the point. That's not what I want to talk about today. Today I want to talk about this particular device and is it any good? So basically, if we take a look at this, you obviously have a glass panel here. The resolution on the glass, or sorry, the resolution of the screen is only 720, but I think it's got some pretty decent viewing angles. You can tell that it's not the best display in the world, especially if you really look at it. It's not an OLED. Obviously, it's super cheap. So 720p panel, it's fine for watching videos and stuff like that, but it's not going to set the world on fire. There are definitely much better screens out there. But this one's serviceable, especially if you jack up the brightness. You can kind of use that out in the daylight and stuff like that. It's fine. Now, the rest of the build of the phone is all plastic, so it doesn't necessarily have the most premium feel in the world. It doesn't weigh much, though, so that's the plus side to that, I suppose. If we take a look at the sides here, you have your volume rocker, and you have your power button. Now, the power button here is obviously on the side, and it also functions as your fingerprint reader, and I think it actually works pretty good. It's in a cool spot, as opposed to being on the back or in the screen. And it's pretty responsive. I've only had a handful of times where it hasn't recognized my finger. The only other thing I would complain about with this particular thing is because it's on the side, if you put your hands in your pockets a lot, like I do, you're going to inadvertently touch this. And sometimes I've pulled my phone out and it says, you have to enter your PIN because you've touched the sensor too many times and it didn't recognize your fingerprint. So, it is possible to essentially unlock the phone while it's in your pocket, or to trip the sort of fail-safe or whatever on the fingerprint lock by touching it too many times with a finger that's not registered without even realizing you're doing it. Anyway, if you look over on the other side, basically you have the SIM tray over here. I know it's really hard to see, but basically you just pop that open, and my model only has spots for a single SIM and a micro SD card. So I've got a small micro SD card in here just to chuck some music on and to put all my photos and stuff on. And yeah, it works all right for me. I don't have any issues with that. And like I said, it's only the single SIM. I believe there are models that have the dual SIM slot. However, I believe it would eat up your micro SD slot, but don't quote me on that. If you look at the bottom here, we basically have a single mono speaker. The loudness on this is pretty decent, so I don't have much of an issue with it. However, I find occasionally just the way I hold my phone, I tend to block the speaker quite a bit, especially if like I'm, holding it like this and I'm sort of like, video chatting with somebody, and I can inadvertently cover up the speaker or even the microphone, which is just right there. I've had people before, especially on video chats, be like, "Hey, I can't hear you. You're so muffled." Blah 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 blah. nice touch is that you still have the 3.5 mil headphone jack, so good to see that that's there on this particular device. And obviously on the bottom here, you have a USB-C charging data port. So, good to see USB-C becoming sort of the normalized. Obviously, if this had a micro USB in there, I would be somewhat disappointed. If we flick it over onto the back, I'm not going to lie, I did drop this guy, so it's got a couple small scratches down at the bottom here. I apologize. But if you take a look, obviously you've got this sort of, I know it's really, really hard to see, but you can see how there's sort of almost a gradient here. And this is actually textured, so it's basically just a bunch of small sort of parallel lines that kind of go across the entire back in a diagonal sort of motion until you get towards the bottom here, where obviously you have the Samsung logo. It does have a textured feel to it. It's very subtle. It does provide a little bit of extra grip, I feel, although, not that much. You have super sweaty hands, so I usually don't have an issue with holding my phone, but I know for some people, having that sort of tactile back would be good. And obviously up here you've got your flash, and then you have a quad camera setup. Now, just a couple things about the camera. You have a 48 megapixel main shooter, you have a 5 megapixel ultra wide, you have a 2 megapixel macro camera, a 2 megapixel depth sensor, and then obviously on the front, which if I unlock my phone here, you have the little teardrop, dewdrop, or whatever the hell you want to call it, thing, and that's a selfie camera that's 8 megapixels. Now, I will say I have been very impressed, given the price of this device, with the main shooter. The 48 megapixel camera actually is capable of taking shots that are fairly detailed and look really good, especially for social media. However, at night, not so great. So, if you're in good daylight sort of lighting conditions, the 48 megapixel camera does an excellent job, especially if you're just planning on just posting those photos to social media. Now, the wide angle lens I've played around with, and I think that one's pretty impressive as well. Obviously, you lose a bit of detail going wide. It's only 5 megapixels, but it does a serviceable job if you're interested in taking wide angle shots. Now, the 2 megapixel macro, that's where, let's be honest, I don't really use it all that often, but when I have used it, I haven't been super impressed with it. Again, details, not fantastic. And I feel like it has trouble picking up what you're actually trying to shoot when you're in that macro setting. Now, obviously, you can always tap the screen to let it know. But, if you're trying to take a quick photo or whatever, most people rely on their sort of auto focus. This one, when you use the macro sensor, not fantastic at figuring out what you actually want to shoot. Now, the depth sensor is okay. I don't really use it all that much. I know, a couple years ago, people were all into the faux, DSLR photography or whatever. I think it's sort of kind of gone out of fashion. But I don't use it all that much. It's serviceable. It functions. It works. It does take a little while because it's not really, a DSLR camera. So it's not a manual camera. It does take a little bit to try to figure out what's in the background and what's in the foreground or whatever, and what your subject actually is, but it does do a decent job. The selfie camera I barely ever use. I don't take a lot of selfies, but for video chatting and stuff like that, I haven't had a problem with it. So overall, I've been pretty happy with the camera performance of this particular phone. I should mention before we move further that this is running Android 10 out of the box. I have gotten updates though, so this is actually on Android 11, my particular unit here, and it is running a MediaTek Helio P35. So obviously that's a budget chip, and your Snapdragons and stuff like that are going to blow this out of the water, but for a budget device, for simple things, I think that this guy does a decent job. Now, it comes bundled with, this particular model is 32 gigabytes of inbuilt storage. Now, obviously, your operating system and stuff like that is going to eat about 10 gigs of that. So it's good that it comes with that micro SIM card slot, because you're definitely going to want to pop a cheap one in there to expand your storage. I have found that, loading this up with apps and stuff like that, I really only have like 1 or 2 gigs of internal storage left over once I've gotten everything on there that I want to get on there. So obviously that's not ideal, but again, you're talking about a budget device. So they are skimping on the storage, but you could always expand it yourself with that micro SD card, which I highly recommend. Now, there's a couple different variants of this particular phone. You can get one with more internal storage. I believe it goes up to 64 gigabytes, and that's the model that comes paired with 4 gigabytes of RAM. Now, like I said, my model is 32 gigabytes, and there's two different variants that you can get. You can get a 2 gig model or a 3 gig model, and that's in regards to the internal RAM. I've got the 3 gig, and like I said, performance is snappy enough. I feel like apps launch. I don't have much of an issue. However, I have had some problems with Instagram, particularly with videos and trying to post stories and stuff like that. It tends to struggle with processing that sort of thing, especially, I don't think it's my internet, because I don't have a problem with any other computer or any other phone. Other family members don't seem to have the same problem. So the only thing I can think of is that it's the phone itself. So obviously, you're applying filters or you're doing some basic sort of video editing or whatever on this particular device. It does struggle with processing that video. And so I've had a couple times where the whole system UI sort of freezes up. You get a notification. Do you want to wait, or do you want to try to close it out, etc., etc.? Obviously, you always wait, but there are times when I have to restart my phone in order to use it again. But anyway, let's take a look at maybe some emulation, because I like to play games, and let's take a look at the Sony PlayStation Portable emulator for a variety of operating systems, but we're going to take a look at it obviously on the Android here. Okay, so as you can see, I've got PPSSPP, the Sony PlayStation Portable emulator, up and running on my Samsung A12. Now, this particular emulator can run pretty much anything provided that your hardware can support it, but this being a budget device, we're not going to see God of War Chains of Olympus running on this thing. It's just going to, really slow down. It's going to be almost unplayable. The frame rate is going to be really, really low. But we've got a couple games loaded on here. So we've got Burnout, Metal Slug. Some of these games aren't quite as demanding, so we should have, decent performance with this. We're going to start with Burnout, which is a racing game. If you've never played it, it's excellent. You should totally check it out. I'm going to turn it down because there is some licensed music on here, and I don't want to have this demonetized or anything because of that. So apologies, it's going to be silent. We're going to load a profile, played a little bit, did a little bit of testing. So let's let's just do a single event. Now, you're going to have to forgive me. I normally play this with a Bluetooth controller, but obviously I'm doing just the standard on-screen controls, which are not my favorite. So if I am terrible, please do not judge me, or you can judge me. Let me know in the comments how bad I am. Anyway, let's take a look at this, see how it performs. So look, I'm about to crash, but that is not a reflection of the emulator. It's a reflection of my inability to use the on-screen controls. So as you can see, there's no stuttering, there's no glitching out. Seems to run pretty smoothly, especially based on my memory of how the original game performed on the PSP. And yeah, it looks pretty good. Again, I am terrible, so please do not judge me. But anyway, so obviously Burnout is working. So let's take a look at a different game. Okay, everyone, so here we've got Metal Slug XX, which is an excellent game, Neo Geo game. If you've never played Metal Slug, highly recommend. Again, the on-screen controls are going to be terrible. Full disclosure, I'm on the beginner difficulty. That's why I started out with a machine gun, but that's just because I figure while I can, I'm trying to play this while filming at the same time, it's going to be ugly. So again, don't judge my terrible performance. But as you can see, this is running perfect. Again, it's not a particularly demanding game, so I wouldn't expect any issues with this. But obviously, you can see there's a ton of sprites on screen. There's lots of stuff going on, and this phone is handling it no problem. So, I mean, you're going to be able to play a lot of games. Not every game, but you're going to be able to play a lot of games on the PSP. You should have no issues with stuff like, Sega Genesis or Super Nintendo. So feel free to try out your favorite emulators. You probably have some issues with, some of the higher end stuff, your Sega Dreamcast, your Nintendo 64, but, I wouldn't be surprised if some games ran. So it's just a matter of trial and error. Obviously, you could always check to see if there are anybody has tested any particular games or systems that you'd be interested in. But the PSP is pretty good, and this is running really well. So the Samsung A12, like I said, is very much a budget device. However, it does hold its own, particularly if, this is going to be a phone for somebody who isn't necessarily a power user. So people who use just, sort of the normal apps, just do some web browsing, some email, whatever, this phone is going to be fine. And like I said, the camera on here is impressive for the price point. The macro, the selfie, the wide angle, some of them are serviceable, some of them are not. Your mileage is going to really depend on what you expect, but that 48 megapixel main shooter in ideal lighting conditions is quite capable. I think it takes some really, really good photos, particularly if you're just posting to Facebook or Instagram or whatever. So, would I recommend this phone if you're on a tight budget? Yes. Obviously, I would try to go for a model that has at least 3 gigabytes of RAM. You really want to go for that 4 gigabyte model. But 3 gigabytes will get you by. Now, if this is for a child or, an older person who maybe isn't using their phone all that often or just uses their phone primarily as a phone, then yeah, I would 100% recommend this guy. I think, it's well worth its money. However, Samsung has a million, it seems, different models out. They have their flagships, they have their mid-range ones, and then they have a whole bunch of models that are really going after that sort of lower end portion of the market, which is smart because, Apple dominates here in the United States, and so obviously they're looking for a bigger market share by appealing to people who, wouldn't necessarily spend the amount of money that you would need to spend to get an iPhone. But anyway, like I said, it is a budget device. It's plastic. There are some caveats that you're going to have to deal with, but I think for what you are getting for the money, it's pretty decent, particularly if you get it, subsidized through, your wireless provider or, you get it free. Now, I wouldn't necessarily buy this phone outright. I believe it's over $200. I do not think it's a $200 phone. If you're really after the warranty or the name brand, then maybe $200 is worth it to you. But I think for $200, you can go with a, Chinese company like Xiaomi or something like that and get a much, much better device. But again, it's totally up to you. Like I said, if you get this for next to nothing or really, really cheap, then yeah, I think it's a decent pick. Anyway, that's going to do it for this episode of Gizmo Joe. Thanks so much for watching. If you haven't hit that subscribe button, please do. It really helps me out. And if you have any questions or concerns or anything else, just let me know in the comments below. Anyway, this is Gizmo Joe signing off.